ॐ विश्वंदर्पण दृश्यमान नगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतम् पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्भूतं यथा निद्रया यस्साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयम् तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तं तोटकं वार्तिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठं अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यदीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे नमः श्री परमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रिय ब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् ॐ We will chant the Gita Dhyana Shlokas. Om Pāthāya Pratibodhitāṃ Bhagavata Nārāyaṇena Swayam Vyāsena Grathitāṃ Purāṇamunina Madhye Mahabhāratam Advaitaṃ Bhagavatīṃ अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयः प्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्स सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम् भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामा विकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरणनदी कैवर्तकः केशवः पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटं नानाख्यानककेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितं लोके सज्जनषट्पदैरहरहः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजं कलिमल प्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः I welcome you all to the sixth class of our Bhagavad Gita study. In the last class, we entered into the first chapter titled Arjuna Vishada Yoga, meaning the topic of Arjuna's sorrow. So we saw there are two messages that we have to extract from the first chapter. The first message is that the first chapter presents the problem of samsara. A lay person experiences a particular disease in the form of certain distressing symptoms. That's all he knows, that he is in distress. He doesn't know the root cause of the disease, nor the remedy for the disease. So similarly, Arjuna too experiences the distressing symptoms of Shlokaha and Mohaha, meaning sorrow and confusion with regards to what is to be done and what is not to be done. What we have to understand is that this is not just Arjuna's problem alone. Because if the problem was specific to Arjuna, then the remedy will also be specific to Arjuna. And we would not need to study that several thousands of years later. So if we are to be motivated to study this several thousands of years later, we have to understand that the problem is not specific to Arjuna. In fact, what Arjuna went through was a specific instance of a more general, in fact, a universal human problem. Because every human being carries this self-assessment that I am this body-mind. And through this body-mind, I am connected to my family, my possessions, my profession, etc. And therefore, viewing oneself as this limited body-mind connected to a few things, one sees oneself as being apurnaha. Apurnaha means I am deficient, wanting, limited in every respect. And therefore, emotionally, one leans upon the world. But the world is inherently uncontrollable, unpredictable, and unsustainable. But still one leans upon the world, one clings to the world for one's emotional well-being. And this is called ragaha. So we have ahankara, mamakara, apurnatvam. And then ragaha, leaning upon the world, clinging to the world for my emotional well-being. But since the world is inherently unpredictable, uncontrollable, and unsustainable, the leaning upon the world is like walking with very weak crutches. The crutches can break any time, and they do break. So similarly, whatever I lean upon can go away. And therefore, it results in sorrow. It results in anxiety, worry, stress, fear, culminating in sorrow. Act on sorrow when there is an actual loss, or even when I imagine the loss of something. Therefore, the shokaha is a universal problem. And whenever I emotionally lean upon something, whenever I emotionally cling to something, there are bound to be situations where I cannot do what is right, where I take shortcuts or I do what is convenient rather than doing what is right. And therefore, shokaha, when there is moha, confusion with regards to right and wrong, that leads to swadharma parityagaha and paradharma anushthānam, as we saw. Or even purely the pursuit of swadharma for the sake of the perpetuation of this limited individual, for the sake of the perpetuation of the ahankara, mamakara, that results in a perpetuation, the ragaha, that results in a perpetuation of shoka and moha. And therefore, life becomes a continuous struggle because there's constantly some reason for shokaha, moha. Therefore, whatever Arjuna experienced is a universal human problem. And therefore, I have to understand that it is also my problem. But only then, whatever remedy Krishna is going to offer, that becomes a relevant remedy for me too. This is the first message that I have to take from the first chapter. And the second message is the coming together of the Guru and the Shishya. As we saw, all of the Shastras, all of our Shastras emphasize that if one wants to solve this fundamental human problem, then one needs guidance from a Guru. Because one understands the problem only in terms of the symptoms, but the Guru understands the problem in terms of its root cause and its remedy. And therefore, the indispensability of a Guru is pointed out. And a few other things that come out are the qualifications of the student and the qualifications of the Guru. The student must be somebody who has discovered the symptoms of the problem and now wants to solve the problem, not symptomatically, but fundamentally, because he understands that any kind of a symptomatic cure is only going to perpetuate the disease because the root cause remains intact. Therefore, he wants to solve the problem fundamentally. And one should also recognize one's own helplessness in terms of solving this. And then the qualifications of the Guru, rather the Guru himself, must be free of these disease and must know the root cause and the remedy and must be able to administer, communicate the remedy and administer the remedy. So this is the second message of the first chapter. So we saw the first chapter begins with a scene in the palace of Hastinapura where Dhritarashtra is seated next to Sanjaya. And he asks Sanjaya, what did my people and the Pandavas do in the war? Amakaha Pandavaha cha eva kim akurvata he Sanjaya. Dharmakṣetre Kurukshetra samavetaha yuyutsava. So then Sanjaya responds by telling Dhritarashtra that Duryodhana inspected the army of the Pandavas. Drishtva tu Pandavani. Yudham Duryodhanastara Acharyam upasangamya Aja vachanam abravi. Duryodhana inspected the army, and then walked up to Dronacharya and told Dronacharya, look at this great army. Pashya etam Panduputrana Acharya Mahatim Chamon Pashya. So see the vast army of theirs. Vyudham Drupadaputrena Tavashishyena Dhimata, which has been set up by Drishtadumnaha, who is your Shishya, he says. So following this, Duryodhana talks about the Maharathas on the other side. We will just read those verses because those last three verses we had completed in the last class and they are read together. So we'll read those. Sharadaji, you can read after me. Sharadaji there?
Yes, I'm here.
Atra shura maheshvasaha
Atra shura maheshvasaha
Bhīmārjuna samayudhi
Bhīmārjuna samayudhi
Yuyudhano viratascha
Yuyudhano viratascha
Drupadascha maharathah
Drupadascha maharathah
Drishtaketuschekitanaha
Drishtaketuschekitanaha
Kashirajascha viryavan
Kashirajascha viryavan
Purujit kunti bhojascha
Purujit kunti bhojascha
Shaibhyascha narapungavaha
Saibhyascha narapungavaha
Yudhamanyuscha vikrantaha
Yudhamanyuscha vikrantaha
Tamaujascha viryavan
Uttamaujascha viryavan
Saubhadro Draupadeyascha
Saubhadro Draupadeyascha
Sarva eva Maharathaha.
Sarva eva Maharathaha.
Duryodhana points out that look at all these Maharathahas on the other side. Sarva eva Maharathaha. They are all these great warriors. And he says that all of them are similar to Bhima and Arjuna, great warriors, Maharathas. And like we saw, Maharatha is one who can fight 10,000 soldiers at any given time on the other side. So even as Duryodhana is saying these names, there is a certain fear factor in him. That fear factor is increasing as he says all of these gigantic names in the field of warfare. So then, I'm not going to go through each of the names again because we had covered them in the last class. We'll go to verse number 7 now, in which Duryodhana now starts to enumerate the warriors on his side. So he's still talking to Dronacharya. Asmākaṃ tu viśiṣṭāye
Asmākaṃ tu viśiṣṭāye
tānnibodha dvijottama
tānnibodha dvijottama
nāyakā mama sainyasya
nāyakā mama sainyasya
saṃjñārthaṃ tānbravīmi te.
saṃjñārthaṃ tānbravīmi te.
He addresses Dronacharya here. You see the last word in the first line. He says dvijottama. Dvijottama. So dvijanam uttamaha, meaning one who is exalted, most learned amongst the twice born. Vijaha means twice born. Twice born means that one who has gone through an initiation into the Gayatri mantra. So that is called the second birth of a human being. So amongst the twice born, he refers to Dronacharya as the most learned one. And he tells Drona, nibodha. You see, asmākaṃ tu viśiṣṭā tānnibodha dvijottama. So he says, nibodha. Nibodha means may you know. May you take note, he says. May you know, may you take note of what? He says, tānnibodha. May you know them. May you take note of them. So who are they that he is talking about? Tānnibodha. He says, ye tu viśiṣṭāha. The first line, tu viśiṣṭā ye is there. We are rearrange it as ye tu viśiṣṭāha. So those warriors who are distinguished, important, prominent, tānnibodha, ye tu viśiṣṭāha, tānnibodha. So distinguished, prominent, important, amongst whom? He says, asmākaṃ. Asmākaṃ means amongst us. Asmākaṃ ye tu viśiṣṭāha tānnibodha. And then in the second line, he says, tānbravīmi. Towards the end, he says, tānbravīmi. So he says, bravīmi, meaning I mention. So whom do I mention? Tānbravīmi. I mention them, he says. And who are they? He says, nāyakā. Ye nāyakā. Those who are the commanders. Ye nāyakā tānbravīmi. Those who are the commanders, I mention. I mention them. Commanders of what? He says, mama sainyasya. Mama sainyasya. Nāyakā mama sainyasya. So, ye mama sainyasya nāyakā. I mention those who are the commanders of my army. And for whose sake is he mentioning? Yes, tānbravīmi te. For your sake. Te tubhyam. For your sake I am mentioning them, he says. And why is he mentioning them? Saṃjñārthaṃ. Saṃjñārthaṃ tānbravīmi te. The second line we have saṃjñārthaṃ in the last quarter. Saṃjñārthaṃ tānbravīmi te. So ye mama sainyasya nāyakāha tān saṃjñārthaṃ te bravīmi. Those who are the commanders of my army, I mention them. I mention them for your sake. Saṃjñārthaṃ, meaning to introduce them to you, so that you are aware of who they are. So Duryodhana wants to name all the Maharathas who have joined his army. So Duryodhana is kind of doing like a comparative study of both the armies. Even in a T20 IPL game or any of these T20 matches, in the beginning you see the commentators will talk about the important players on both the sides. And then they glorify the strengths of certain players, saying that he is a specialist left arm spinner, or he is a specialist right arm batsman, and why the left-handers are needed in this team, and so on, and how they can counter the spinners. So they talk about all this comparative analysis. So Duryodhana is also doing this kind of in a mental study of who is there on both the sides, and he's trying to assess the strength of both the sides. So then he continues in verse number 8, where he enumerates the people on the Kaurava side. bhavānbhīṣmaśca karṇaśca.
bhavānbhīṣmaśca karṇaśca.
kṛpaśca samitiñjayaḥ.
kṛpaśca samitiñjayaḥ. Okay.
aśvatthāmā vikarṇaśca.
aśvatthāmā vikarṇaśca.
saumadattistathaiva.
saumadattistathaiva.
So he is giving a list of the people. We can bring in the a verb like santi here, because there is no visible verb here in the shloka. So we can say santi. And he's giving a list, and he starts with Bhavan. Bhavan means Dronacharya. That you, sir, he says. Bhavan means sir. He says, sir, you yourself. Bhavan. And Bhīṣmaśca. He comes up next, he says Bhīṣmaha. Bhīṣmaha is there on our side, and there was really nobody equal to Bhīṣma. Because he had this Vardhana of Ichha Mrityuhu, meaning he could determine the time and place of his death. And therefore, he could not be killed by anybody unless he himself wanted to die. And therefore Duryodhana knew that Bhishma is unstoppable once he gets going. In fact, like we saw, that even Krishna felt compelled to break his vow and enter the war when he saw Bhishma's might. And therefore, he gives prominence to Bhishma. Then he says, Karṇaha cha. Karṇaha was the only one in the world who could stand up to Arjuna. There was no other one equal to Arjuna. And kṛpaśca samitiñjayaḥ. He talks about Kripacharya next and says that he is samitiñjayaḥ, meaning samitim jayati sarvada. Samitim means a yuddha in a war or a battle. The one who is always victorious is Kripacharya. Kṛpaśca samitiñjayaḥ. And aśvatthāmā, who is the son of Dronacharya. He could have received some special insider information from Dronacharya in terms of the training being his son. So he is also very, very powerful. And in fact, both Kripacharya and Aśvatthāmā, they are both considered to be Chiranjeevis, meaning that they continue to exist in some form until the end of the Srishti for different reasons. And vikarṇaśca, then he talks about Vikarṇaha, who was also a very powerful warrior. And in fact, interestingly, Vikarṇaha was the only one on the Kaurava side who had some sense of dharma and adharma. He is the only Kaurava who is considered to be just. Because he was the only one who stood up and protested when Draupadi was being humiliated. Vikarṇaha. And saumadattistathaiva, the son of Somadatta. Saumadattihi, another powerful, mighty warrior. And tatha evacha, he says that all of these warriors are on our side. And there is a slightly different variation of the shloka also, where instead of saumadattistathaiva, there's a variation that says saumadattirjayadrathaḥ. So if we were to take that variation, he is also including Jayadrathaḥ, whom we had seen earlier as in the Dhyana Shloka. We had seen Bhishma Drona Tata Jayadratha Jala. So he was also specifically mentioned in the Dhyana Shlokas. And he is the husband of Dushala. Dushala is the only daughter of Dhritarashtra and Gandhari. So Jayadratha had this boon from Shiva that on one day of the war, he could block all of the Pandavas except for Arjuna. So he could keep them engaged without being defeated. Therefore, he used this when Abhimanyu was trapped in the Chakravyuha and Arjuna had gone somewhere else. So he held up, he blocked all of the other Pandavas from coming to Abhimanyu's rescue, and that's why he was considered to be the main factor because of whom Abhimanyu was killed. He was responsible for the death of Abhimanyu. Jayadrathaḥ. These are the warriors he mentions. And then he continues saying there are many others. We'll read verse number 9. Anye cha bahavaḥ shūrāः
Anye ca bahavaḥ shūrāः
madarthe tyakta jīvitāः
madarthe tyakta jīvitāः
nānā shastra praharanaः
nānā shastra praharanaः
sarve yuddha viśāradaः.
sarve yuddha viśāradaः.
So again we can supply a verb like santi here because there is no explicit kriyapadam here. So anye, he says anye santi. He says others are there. Anye santi. So who are they? He says anye cha bahavaḥ shūrāः. Bahavaḥ shūrāः. Anye bahavaḥ shūrāः santi. He says. And many other brave warriors are there. He says. And what kind of warriors are they? In the second quarter we see tyakta jīvitāः. Tyakta jīvitāः means who have given up their lives. He says. Who have given up their lives. But if we were to literally take the meaning tyakta jīvitāः, meaning that they have given up their lives, then they should already be dead. And then there's no point mentioning them in the armies then, because they will not be able to fight. The meaning that we take here is that they are ready to give up their lives. And there are many others. Anye cha bahavaḥ shūrāः tyakta jīvitāः santi. There are many others who are ready to give up their lives. He says. And for whom are they ready to give up their lives? We see in the second quarter, madarthe tyakta jīvitāः, madarthe, meaning for me they are ready to give up their lives. He says. And what kind of warriors are they? He talks about them in the second line. He says, nānā shastra praharanaha. Nāna means many. But shastra refers to weapons that are held in one's hand and then fought, like sword and mace, etc. You hold it in your hand and you fight. So that's what shastram means. But praharanaha, he says, praharana refers to weapons that are released from the hand. Like arrows and spears, those are released from the hand. So nāna shastra praharana means those who are skilled in using these various different kinds of weapons. They are highly skilled at using these weapons, who can handle many weapons. And sarve yuddha viśāradaḥ, meaning that they are all experts in warfare and martial arts. Such people are there who are ready to give up their lives for me. He says that. Anye cha bahavaḥ shūrāः sarve yuddha viśāradaḥ nānā shastra praharanaḥ madarthe tyakta jīvitāः. And then you go to the next verse, where Duryodhana appears to be expressing some concerns. We'll look at that. Aparyāptam tad asmākaṃ
Aparyāptam tad asmākaṃ
balam bhīṣmābhirakshitam
balam bhīṣmābhirakshitam
paryāptam tvidamēteshāṃ
paryāptam tvidamēteshāṃ
balam bhīmābhirakshitam.
balam bhīmābhirakshitam.
There are two possible ways of looking at this shloka, which look a bit different superficially. They look quite different. But then there's an underlying theme there that we will bring out, which is a common idea in the two. And that hinges on the meaning that is given to the word aparyaptam and paryaptam. So in one case, we can take aparyaptam to mean not sufficient. Aparyaptam means not sufficient. So we look at the first meaning first and then briefly look at the second meaning. So in the first way of looking at this, aparyaptam means not sufficient. What is not sufficient? He says, tad asmākaṃ balam, tad balam aparyaptam. Here, balam refers to sainyam or the army. He said that army is not sufficient. Whose army is he talking about? The asmākaṃ. So asmākaṃ means ours. He says that army of ours is insufficient. So as he's talking to Dronacharya, he's looking at the Pandava army. Because he said, Etesham Panduputranam. And therefore, the Pandava army is probably, he is addressing it as idam, meaning this. And his own army he is addressing as that. So he says, that army of ours is not sufficient. Asmākaṃ tad balam aparyaptam. And what kind of army of ours? Bhīṣmābhirakshitam, which is defended by Bhīṣma, led by Bhīṣma. Bhīṣmābhirakshitam asmākaṃ tad balam aparyaptam. And then he says, paryaptam in the second line. Paryaptam meaning it is sufficient, he says. What is sufficient? Tu idam etesham. Paryaptam, that tvidam etesham is split as tu idam etesham. Paryaptam, it is sufficient. What is sufficient? Idam balam tu, meaning this army, he says, is sufficient. Whose army is it? It says, etesham Panduputranam, as we saw. Of these Panduputras, of these Pandavas, this army of theirs, he says, is sufficient. And what kind of army is theirs? Bhīmābhirakshitam, that is defended by Bhima. So here, if you look at it, we'll continue with this way of looking at the verse, where he says, our army is insufficient and their army is sufficient. If we look at it objectively on every metric, the Kaurava army appears to be superior, because there is a certain battalion size that's called akshauhini. Akshauhini. Akshauhini means an army of several tens of thousands of chariots, several tens of thousands of elephants, and in fact around 60,000 horses and nearly 1 lakh soldiers. They comprise one akshauhini. And the Kaurava army, if you look at it, it had 11 akshauhinis in it. The Pandava army only had 7 akshauhinis in it. And so even the strength of the army wise, the Kaurava army was bigger. And if you look at individuals also, then Bhishma, there was nobody equal to Bhishma on anywhere in both the armies. And similarly, we look at Drona. Dronacharya was the teacher of all the Pandavas, and in fact all the Kauravas. As Swamiji says, that a teacher knows the weaknesses of all the students. Like if there is a maths teacher, for example, he knows that this fellow does well in algebra and geometry and calculus and all that. But his weak point is trigonometry. He knows that. So if he knows this, then he can set a question paper that can be very difficult for each student. To each student, he can give a different question paper. That is very difficult for that student. So Drona was probably capable of giving a very tough time to all of his shishyas. Therefore, Drona was there on his side. And Karna, again, there was nobody equal to Karna except for Arjuna. So even individuals wise, his army had a lot of great warriors. But then Duryodhana still feels it is insufficient. And the reason we give is that this is because dharma is not on their side. Dharma is not on that side. This is why we say that artha and kamaha pursuits, even looking at it in day-to-day life scenarios, leaving aside a war scenario, even artha and kamaha pursuits, that wealth, accomplishment of wealth, and accomplishment of sense pleasures, etc., that can really give that security and happiness that you can get out of whatever happiness, even though it may not be lasting, permanent security and permanent happiness, none of these are capable of giving. But whatever transient security and happiness also they are capable of giving, we say that they cannot give unless they are accomplished with dharma. Because, as we said, dharma is what results in harmony, harmony within and harmony without. And if something has been pursued, accomplished without dharma, then the internal harmony cannot be there because this individual is a conflicted individual. And a conflicted individual who has disharmony within cannot enjoy whatever accomplishments of wealth and everything else, whatever accomplishments of materials have been done. So even if a person is surrounded by all the materials and wealth, if that has not been accomplished with dharma, then that cannot give the peace, security, and happiness. That even the transient peace, security, and happiness that it's capable of giving. So Duryodhana got Krishna's army also. He got this bigger army, and that includes Krishna's army, and he has got all these great warriors on his side, but he still feels insecure. This is what we get from this way of looking at it. Now, the other way of looking at it, it depends on the meaning you give to paryaptam and aparyaptam. Is that he's trying to boost the morale. He himself is not feeling that great because as we said, internally he feels that he is insufficient. But sometimes you can see all these managers giving a pep talk in different sessions meant to boost the employee morale. Right? Similarly, here Duryodhana is saying that aparyaptam means in this way of looking at it cannot be overwhelmed. So he is saying that our army cannot be overwhelmed. So objectively saying, yes, his army is bigger, so he's trying to give some of those statistics and trying to justify why his army cannot be overwhelmed. And their army, he says, is paryaptam, meaning it can be overwhelmed. So this is another way to look at it. But the common factor is that he is internally insufficient, internally insecure, and even if he's saying this, he's trying to say it just to boost the morale, even though internally he knows that he's feeling shaky. So now we'll go to the 11th verse. Ayaneshu cha sarveshu
अयनेषु च सर्वेषु
yatha bhagam avasthitaha
यथा भागमवस्थिताः
bhishmamevabhirakshantu
भीष्ममेवाभिरक्षन्तु
bhavantah sarva eva hi.
भवन्तः सर्व एव हि.
So at the end of these manager pep talks, usually they give some kind of action items saying that this is the highest priority thing we have to pursue in the coming financial year or something like that. So similarly, you see Duryodhana here is setting the priorities for his army. So he says, Abhirakshantu, meaning may you protect, he says. In the second line, he says, Bhishmam eva bhirakshantu. Bhishmam eva abhirakshantu. Means he says, may you protect. And may you protect. So may you protect whom? This is the natural question. Protect whom? So he says, Bhishmam eva abhirakshantu. May you protect Bhishma. He says, Bhishma alone. That's our highest priority. We'll come to why he thinks that's the highest priority. But who should protect? Who should protect Bhishma alone? So he says, Bhavantaha sarve Bhishmam eva bhirakshantu Bhavantas sarve eva hi. So here it says sarva eva hi. Really speaking, it's because of sandhi that it has become sarva eva hi. If you split the sandhi, it becomes sarve eva hi. So bhavantaha sarve, he says, may you all protect Bhishma alone. And how to protect Bhishma? So he says, in the second quarter, he says, Yatha bhagam avasthitaha. Yatha bhagam avasthitaha. Meaning, remaining where you are. Remaining where you are, may you protect Bhishma. And remaining where? He says, Yatha bhagam avasthitaha. Remaining where? So he wants to reinforce remaining where? He says, Ayaneshu cha sarveshu. So remaining, ayaneshu cha sarveshu. Sarveshu means at all the strategic entry points or all the strategic paths. So a vyuha, for example, an army formation has got certain strategic points or certain important points. So remaining there, he says, may you protect Bhishma. So this is a lot like captain sometimes does a field setting in the cricket field. Right? So there's this point area and slips and fine leg and long on, etc. So he makes sure that he sometimes shouts out the instructions saying, you be there and you be there, and so on. Similarly, Duryodhana is doing a field setting here to make sure that Bhishma is protected. Ayaneshu cha sarveshu yatha bhagam avasthitaha bhavantaha sarve Bhishmameva bhirakshantu. Why is he singling out Bhishma in particular? Because well, Bhishma is like a pillar, central pillar of his army. And like we said, if Bhishma gets going, he cannot be stopped. But if something happens to Bhishma, then the army of the morale of the entire army would just plummet like anything. So Bhishma is important not just as a warrior who can fight. Even psychologically, Bhishma is very important to him and his army. His presence makes a huge difference. And therefore, he shouts at everybody literally, saying that may you all protect Bhishma. Now, Bhishma may have overheard Duryodhana doing all this shouting to all the people and then pointing towards Bhishma also. And maybe he heard a few words like Bhishma meva bhirakshantu, etc. And Bhishma doesn't feel that great about when somebody says he has to be protected. Because all of these warriors, they have their own egos and they don't like to be talked about in terms of being protected. So now Sanjaya, still all of this narration is being done by Sanjaya. So Sanjaya is telling Dhritarashtra now what Bhishma did after this. So now Duryodhana's words that Sanjaya relate to Dhritarashtra, now that has ended. Duryodhana's words have ended now. Now he's talking about what Bhishma did. We'll read verse number 12. Tasya sanjanayan harsham.
तस्य सञ्जनयन् हर्षम्
Kuru vriddhah pitāmahah.
कुरुवृद्धः पितामहः
Simhanādam vinadyochaihi.
सिंहनादं विनद्योच्चैः
Shankham dadmau pratapavan.
Shankham dadmau pratapavan.
So here, as we said, Sanjaya is reporting now what Bhishma did. So he says, Dadmau, if you look at the fourth quarter, the Shankham Dadmau Pratapavan, Dadmau, he says. Dadmau meaning he blew. He blew. So blew what? The Shankham Dadmau. He blew the conch. So who blew the conch? So in the first line, towards the end, we have Pitamaha. Bhishma is addressed as Pitamaha. So Pitamaha Shankham Dadmau. Pitamaha blew the conch, he says. And what kind of Bhishma is he? He says, Kuru Vriddha Pitamaha, meaning the grandsire or the eldest amongst the Kurus, who's Bhishma, Pitamaha, Shankham Dadmau, he blew the conch. And again, what kind of Bhishma is he? So if you see the last word of the last quarter, it says Pratapavan, meaning who was Tejasvi, brilliant, majestic. He was brilliant and majestic. He stood out. His presence, his personality stood out. So Pratapavan, Kuru Vriddha Pitamaha, Shankham Dadmau. So this brilliant, majestic Bhishma, who's Kuru Vriddha, he blew the conch. And how did he blow the conch? In the third quarter, he says, Sinhanadam Vinatya Uchaihi Shankam Dadmau Pratapavan Uchaihi. So he blew his conch loudly. Uchaihi Shankam Dadmau. And then having done what did he blow the conch? Yes, Simhanadam Vinadya means he roared like a lion. He said, I don't need anybody to protect him. He's just conveying that message non-verbally by roaring like a lion. Simhanadam Vinadya Uchaihi Shankham Dadmau Pratapava. And in doing so, what was he trying to do? What was he trying to do? He says, Tasya Sanjanayan Harsham. So Sanjanayan, that he was creating, Utpadayan, Sanjanayan, in the first quarter we have Tasya Sanjanayan Harsham. Means he was trying to, he was by roaring like a lion and blowing his conch loudly. He was trying to create cheer. He's trying to create cheer and enthusiasm. Sanjanayan, Harsham Sanjanayan. So he was trying to create joy, cheer, enthusiasm. For whom? Tasya means Duryodhanasya. Satya Sanjanayan Harsham. So he was trying to cheer, because he could probably sense in Duryodhana's body language that he was a bit worried about comparing the two armies, and he could sense that that Duryodhana was perhaps even feeling a bit fearful. And so in order to enthuse, to cheer Duryodhana, he roared like a lion and he blew his conch loudly. And in blowing the conch loudly, he is also signaling that the army is now ready for the battle, for the war to begin. And then what happened? And all the others in the Kaurava army also followed. So we're just waiting for a signal from the leader, the commander-in-chief. We'll read verse number 13. Tata Shankhaśca bhairyascha.
Tata Shankhaśca bhairyascha.
Anavanaka gomukhaha.
Anavanaka gomukhaha.
Sahasaivabhyahanyanta.
सहसैवाभ्यहन्यन्त
सशब्दस्तु मूलो भवत्.
सशब्दस्तु मूलोऽभवत्.
He says abhyahanyanta. If you see in the third quarter, sahasa eva abhyahanyanta. Sahasa eva abhyahanyanta. So tataha shankhaha. We read it from the beginning. Tataha shankhaha cha bheryaha cha panavanaka gomukhaha सहसा एव अभ्यहन्यन्त सशब्दस्तुमुलो भवत्. सह शब्दः तुमुलः अभवत्. So he says सहसा एव अभ्यहन्यन्त. अभ्यहन्यन्त meaning that they were sounded. What were sounded? शंखाः च भैर्यः च पणवाणक गोमुखाः. So shankhaha means conscious. Conscious was sounded from the entire Kaurava army. Suddenly conscious started to become heard. And bhairyaha means bhairi shabdaha bahuvachanam. Atma bahuvachanam of bhairi shabdaha. It means kettle drums. So if you would have seen these drums with these, they beat it like this. Dum, dum, dum. So they create these loud noises. So shankhaha, bhairyascha, and panavanaka gomukhaha. So panavaha again is a type of a drum. So shankhaha means the bhairi means a kettle drum, which is sounded like this. But then this panavaha means it's called a tabor. Tabor is more like a vertically held drum where you beat it like this. And anaka is again a drum that you beat, a different type of a drum. So different types of drums and conches. And gomukhaha means all these trumpets and horns. They sound like this. So all of these sounds start to get heard. Shankhascha bhairyascha panavanaka gomukhaha abhyahanyanta. And how were they sounded? So he says sahasa eva in the second line. Sahasa eva, suddenly, immediately, right after Bhishma's signal, when Bhishma blew this conch and rode like a lion and blew the conch, the entire Kaurava army follows with all these sounds. And when tataha means then. The first line we have tataha means then, means after Bhishma's signal. And then he says in the last quarter, he says saha shabdaha tumulaha abhavat, meaning that the sound was tumultuous. So interestingly, if you see tumulaha is a Sanskritam word, tumulaha, the English equivalent is also tumultuous. There are many such English words that you can find, many. And in fact, as you read many of these verses, you just encounter sometimes these Sanskritam words that have similar sounding English words. Therefore, the idea that Sanskritam is the mother of all the languages, because there are many such words in different languages that you can trace to roots in Sanskritam. So the sound was tumultuous. It was not music, not loud, not just music, but loud noises, chaotic, pandemonium, as they say, pandemonium. So this is what the Kauravas did. Now what did the Pandavas do? So he says in verse number 14, we read that. Tatashvetairhayair
ततश्वेतैर्हयैर्युक्ते
महतिस्यन्दने स्थितौ
महतिस्यन्दने स्थितौ
माधवः पाण्डवश्चैव
माधवः पाण्डवश्चैव
दिव्यौ शङ्खौ प्रदध्मतुः.
दिव्यौ शङ्खौ प्रदध्मतुः.
So it says pradhatmatuhu, pradhatmatuhu. So this is, it means they too blew. They two of them blew. Two of them blew. So here we find this dhma dhatu in Sanskritam. This is appearing in all of these verses because in the last verse, in the verse earlier, we saw dadhmau, shankham dadhmau we saw in verse number 11, and then now we have pradatmatuhu. So dadhmau, dadmatuhu, dadmuhu. These are the forms of dhma dhatu, dadhmau, dadmatuhu, dadmuhu. So in these different verses, Vyasacharya is using the different forms of this dhma dhatu, meaning he that to blow. So pradhatmatuhu means the two blew, he says. So which two? So in the next line he says Madhavaha Pandavaschaiva. So Madhavaha Pandavaha cha eva pradhatmatuhu, meaning that Krishna and Arjuna, they blew. And what did they blow? The second line we have in the last quarter, Divyau Shankhau Pradhatmatuhu. Madhavaha Pandavaha cha eva Divyau Shankhau Pradhatmatuhu, means Krishna and Arjuna, they blew their divine conscience. And situated, he says, Stitau, in the last word of the first line we see Stitau. So Stitau Madhavaha Pandavaschaiva Chaiva Divyau Shankhau Pradatmatuhu means situated. Situated, Krishna and Arjuna blew their conscience. Situated where? In the second quarter, he says, Mahati Syandane Stitau. So situated in the large chariot, located, stationed in their large chariot. Mahati means large. Syandane, Mahati Syandane means in their large chariot, situated in their large chariot. Madhavaha and Pandavaha, Krishna and Arjuna, blew their divine conscience. And what kind of chariot was it? Yukte, he says, Tataha. In the first quarter we see Tataha, Shvetaihi, Hayaihi, Yukte. So Yukte Mahati Syandane Stitau. So Yukte Mahati Syandane means in the large chariot which was connected. Yukte. So connected with what? Hayaihi, Shvetaihi, Hayaihi, Yukte is connected with these white horses. Connected with the white horses means drawn by the white horses. They blew there, situated in such a chariot that is connected to these white horses. Krishna and Arjuna blew their conches. And when did they blow their conches? Tataha, the first word of the shloka, Tataha, means after that. After that means after this pandemonium, after these noisy sounds were heard from the Kaurava side. And now he gives a list of the conches of the different warriors. So we will read verses 15 and 16. Panchajanyam Hrishikeshaha
Panchajanyam Hrishikeshaha
Devadattam Dhananjayaha
Devadattam Dhananjayaha
Paundram Dadhmau Mahashankham
Paundram Dadhmau Mahashankham
Bhimakarma Vrikodaraha
Bhimakarma Vrikodaraha
Ananta Vijayam Raja
Ananta Vijayam Raja
Kunti Putro Yudhishthiraha
Kunti Putro Yudhishthiraha
Nakulassaha Devascha
Nakulas Sahadevascha
Sughoshamani Pushpakau.
Sughoshamani Pushpakau.
So here he is giving the names of the warriors and their conches. So in the second line we says Paundram Dadmau. Dadmau means again Dma Dhatu, means to blow. This is the Ekavachanam form in this verse. Last time we saw Dadmatuhu, that was the Dvivachanam form. Whereas here he says Dadmau, which is the Ekavachanam form of Ma Dhatu, saying that he blew, meaning who blew? So Hrishikeshaha, Krishna blew, Hrishikeshaha Dadmau. And he blew what? Krishna blew what? Panchajanyam. So Hrishikeshaha Panchajanyam Dadmau, meaning Krishna blew the Panchajanyam. Panchajanyam is the name of the conch of Krishna. And similarly, he says, Devadattam Dhananjayaha. So Dhananjayaha means Arjunaha. Devadattam Dadmau. Arjuna blew the conch called Devadattaha. Dhananjayaha is another name for Arjuna, meaning one who has amassed a lot of wealth. Arjuna had brought a lot of wealth when their kingdom was ruling. He had brought a lot of wealth from the surrounding kingdoms. And Bhima Karma. So Bhima Karma in the second line we have Paundram Dadmau Mahashankham Bhima Karma Vrikodaraha. So Bhima Karma refers to Bhima. Bhimani Bhayankarani Karmani Yasya Saha. Bhimani Bhayankarani Karmani Yasya Saha means the doer of terrible deeds, as they say. Who has terrible exploits to his name, because he had killed a lot of Rakshasas and killed them in very, very cruel ways. Therefore, he's got Bhima Karma. And he is also called Vrikodaraha. If you see the last word of Shloka 15, Vrikodaraha, meaning Vrikasya udaram iva udaram yasya saha. Vrikasya udaram iva udaram yasya saha, meaning one whose stomach is like the stomach of a wolf. So if you see a wolf is a glutton. A wolf can eat a lot. But then its stomach, it doesn't have any flab or a growing waistline. The wolf stays very slim, but it can eat a lot. So similarly, Bhima would eat and eat and eat. But he did a lot of physical activity also. And therefore, he needed a lot of food also. But he expended all of that. And therefore, he didn't have all of this flab or belly fat and all that. He was very, very fit. And therefore, he didn't have this growing waistline, as they say. Therefore, he is called Vrikodaraha. And even during this Agyatavasa, Bhima appointed himself as a cook, so that he could, if he had been something else, then perhaps people might have suspected, why is this fellow eating so much? But since he employed himself in the kitchen, he could cook a lot, and without others knowing, he could perhaps also eat a lot, and therefore he found that to be very useful. Vrikodara. And what kind of shankham did he blow? It says Paundram Dadmau Mahashankham in verse 15, second line. Paundram Dadmau Mahashankham. He says that he blew this conch called Paundram. And it's a Mahashankham, meaning it's the biggest conch you can find. Because Bhima had very large lungs, Pujya Swamiji says that he could probably blow a very, very big conch also. And therefore, it's specially said to be Mahashankham. And then in verse 16, we have the other Pandavas and their conches. Ananta Vijayam Raja, Kunti Putro Yudhishthiraha. So Yudhishthiraha, addressed by Sanjaya as Raja here. Because rightfully he was a king, although by deceit Although by deceit he had been removed, rightfully speaking, he was the king, and therefore Sanjaya addresses him as king, Raja. Raja Kunti Putraha, the son of Kunti. Yudhishthiraha, who is Yudhishthiraha, Ananta Vijayam Dadmo. Ananta Vijayam is the name of his conch. He is the conch that is capable of giving him infinite victories. Ananta Vijayam. And Nakulaha Sahadevascha, Nakulaha and Sahadevaha, Sughoshamani Pushpakau Dadmau in the last line, Sughoshamani Pushpakau. Meaning that they blew, Nakulaha blew the conch called Sughosha, meaning the conch that makes a pleasant sound, Sughosha. And Sahadeva's conch is called Mani Pushpakaha. Mani Pushpakaha means the one that is decorated with precious gems, Mani Pushpakaha. These are a list of conches. And then he talks about the other warriors on the Pandava side who blew their conches. We'll read verses 17 and 18. Kashyascha parameshvasaha
काश्यश्च परमेश्वासः
Shikhandi cha maharathaha
शिखण्डी च महारथः
Drishtadyumno viratascha
धृष्टद्युम्नो विराटश्च
Satyakischa parajitaha
सात्यकिश्चापराजितः
Drupado Draupadeyascha
द्रुपदो द्रौपदेयाश्च
Sarvashah prithivipate
सर्वशः पृथिवीपते
Saubhadrascha mahabahuhu
सौभद्रश्च महाबाहुः
Shankhan dadbhuh prithak prithak.
शङ्खान् दद्मुः पृथक् पृथक्.
Here, Sanjaya, if you look at the 18th verse, second quarter, Sarvashaha Prithivipate. Sanjaya is addressing Dhritarashtra here. He says Prithivipate, meaning, O king, O lord of the earth. Means, O king, he is addressing Dhritarashtra. And then he says Dadmuhu. So if we say in the last line, last quarter, Shankhan Dadmuhu Prithak Prithak. Again he says Dadmuhu, but here he is using the Bahuvachana Rupam of Dhana Dhatu. So Dhana Dhatu Bahuvachana Rupam. Prathama Bahuvachana Rupam is Dadmuhu, meaning they all blew, he says. So who they all blew what? Says in the last line we see Shankhan Dadmuhu Prithak Prithak. So they all blew their conches. Shankhan Dadmuhu. They all blew their conches. And how did they blow the conches? Says Prithak Prithak, meaning separately. Prithak Prithak Shankhan Dadmuhu. And how did these conches sound? How did they blow? It says Sarvashaha in the second quarter of the 18th verse. You see Sarvashaha Prithvipate, meaning from all directions these sounds came. Sarvashaha Shankhan Dadmuhu, from all directions. Shankhan Dadmuhu, from all directions they blew. And who all blew? So in the first line we have, or first line of the 17th verse, Kashyascha Parameshvasaha, meaning the king of Kashi. Rameshvasaha Kashyaha Cha. King of Kashi, who is the wielder of a great bow. Rameshvasaha, he wields a great bow. So he blew. And Maharathaha Shikhandi Cha. So Shikhandi, who is a Maharathaha, he also blew. And as we know, Shikhandi's life purpose, the purpose of his birth was to kill Bhishma. And then he just enumerates the others. Drishtadyumnaha. Drishtadyumnaha, as we have seen, is the son of Drupada, who was born to kill Dronacharya. He blew. And Viratascha, king of Virata, he blew. Satyakischa aparajitaha. Satyakihi, who is undefeated in war. Aparajitaha means undefeated in war. So Satyakihi blew. And then in the first line of the 18th verse, Drupadaha, he blew his conch. And Draupadeyaha, Draupadeyaha means the 5 sons of Draupadi. They blew the conches. And Saubhadrascha Mahabahu means Abhimanyu, who is very powerful. Saubhadraha, Abhimanyu, who is very powerful, he too blew his conch. And they all blew their conches from all directions and separately, as the shloka says. We read the 19th verse. Saghosho dhartarashtraṇāṃ
सघोषोधार्तराष्ट्राणाम्
hridayāni vyadārayat
हृदयानि व्यदारयत्
nabhascha prithivīṃ chaiva
नभश्च पृथिवीं चैव
tumulo vyanunādayan.
तुमुलो व्यनुनादयन्.
So here he talks about the effect that this sounding of all these conches had on the Kaurava army. So he says in the last word of the first line, Vyadarayat. Vyadarayat means it pierced, he says, it pierced. So what pierced? He says, Saha tumulaha bhoshaha vyadarayat. So if you see in the first line, we have the words Saha bhoshaha. Saha bhoshaha vyadarayat means that sound pierced. And what kind of sound was it? Saha tumulaha bhoshaha vyadarayat. We see the word tumulaha in the last quarter of the shloka. Tumulaha yanunadayan. So saha tumulaha ghoshaha vyadarayat. That tumultuous sound pierced his eyes. And pierced what? Pierced what? He says, Hridayani. In the second quarter, he says, Hridayani. It pierced the hearts. Saha tumulaha ghoshaha Hridayani vyadarayat. Pierced the hearts. Whose hearts did it pierce? He said, Dhartarashtraṇāṃ hridayāni. He says it pierced the hearts of Dhartarashtraṇāṃ, meaning pierced the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. Meaning that these sounds of the Shankhas and such of these Shankhas like Panchajanyam, Hrishikeshaha, Devadattam, Dhananjayaḥ, these great conches, sounds of these great conches that were known to everybody as belonging to these great warriors, it created panic in the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. And doing what did it create this panic? It says Vyanunādayan. The sounds reverberated, resounded, echoed. Vyanunādayan, the last word of the last quarter. Vyanunādayan means it echoed, reverberated. Where did it reverberate? Nabhascha prithivīṃ chaiva. Nabha means the sky. Prithvi is the earth. So it resounded, reverberated, echoed from the earth to the sky and back. It echoed back and forth. Generally, you talk of an echo. If you say something, it may echo from a hill and come back here. It poetically says it echoed from the earth to the sky and bounced back and forth. So it created this effect that pierced the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. So again, we say that this happened because dharma was not on their side. Therefore, there was this latent fear, and that fear, the latent fear emerged when they heard the sound of these great shankhas. And now we will read verses 20 and the first half of verse 21. Athah vyavasthitān drishtva
अथ व्यवस्थितान् दृष्ट्वा
धातराष्ट्रान् कपिध्वजः
धार्तराष्ट्रान् कपिध्वजः
प्रवृत्ते शस्त्रसम्पाते
प्रवृत्ते शस्त्रसम्पाते
धनुरुद्यम्य पाण्डवः
धनुरुद्यम्य पाण्डवः
ऋषिकेशं तदा वाक्यम्
ऋषिकेशं तदा वाक्यम्
इदमाह महीपते
इदमाह महीपते.
So here now Sanjaya talks about a turning point. It's an important turning point. Therefore he says atha. Atha, the word atha at the beginning of this verse indicates a turning point. And at what time was this turning point? Atha, and in the second line of the 20th verse, we see pravritte shastra sampate, pravritte shastra sampate. Meaning, when the arrows are about to be released, when the weapons are about to fall. So he says, atha pravritte shastra sampate. A turning point happens. A thought arises in Arjuna's mind. And Arjuna makes a statement. And this statement happens to be the turning point, because if this thought had not arisen in Arjuna's mind, we would not have had the Gita Upadesha. At this time, he says, aha, aha. You see, Atarashtham kapitvajaha pravritte shastra sampate dhanur udyamya pandavaha rishikesham tada vakyam idam aha mahipate. Idam aha mahipate. So he says, he said. So who said? Pandavaha aha. Pandavaha aha. You see Pandavaha in the second line of the 20th shloka. Last word in the 20th shloka. Pandavaha aha. Arjuna said these words. Atha pravritte shastra sampate Pandavaha aha. Arjuna said. And what kind of Arjuna is he? Is kapitvajaha. Kapitvajaha means kapihi dhvaje yasya saha, means one who has kapihi, means a monkey on his flag. Kapitvajaha, here it's referring to Hanumanji, one who has Hanumanji on his flag. So he is called Kapitvajaha. There is a certain story here about Hanuman, how Hanuman came on Arjuna's flag. Because when the Pandavas were in their vanavasa, one day Draupadi found a particular flower, and that flower is called Saugandhika flower. Apparently, it was a very nice flower. She liked it a lot. So she asks Bhima to go and get more of these flowers. So they are on this Gandhamadana mountain, somewhere in the Himalayas. And then Bhima goes in search of this flower, and there he encounters Hanumanji. And he doesn't know it is Hanumanji. He sees there a monkey is lying there with the tail blocking his way. So he asks the monkey to move his tail. And then the monkey says, I am too old to move around. You just lift my tail and keep it elsewhere. And then Bhima tries to lift the tail, and he is not able to lift the tail. So then he says, this is not an ordinary monkey. And then he bows down to him, and he reveals his real form as being Hanuman. And then they appreciate that they are brothers, because both are Vayuputras. So Bhima requests Hanuman's help in joining the army. But then Hanumanji says he is now very old and he is not interested in fighting the war. But he says he will bless them by being by being on their emblem, by being there as their emblem on their flag. So this is the first story. And then there is another story where Arjuna visits Rameshwaram. And in Rameshwaram, he looks at the Ramasetu. And when Arjuna sees the Ramasetu, again a thought occurs to him that why did Rama need to get the help of all these monkeys to build this bridge? I can probably build such a bridge with my arrows. And there was a certain ahankara thought in his mind. And then he felt Rama too could have built the bridge with his arrows. And Hanumanji felt this. Hanumanji happened to be nearby, and he sensed Arjuna's arrogance. So he appeared there, and then he told Arjuna, he was there in the form of a small monkey, and he told Arjuna that your bridge of arrows will not even withstand my weight. So Arjuna felt, hurt, and he wanted to show that he could build a bridge that could hold his weight. So he built a bridge with arrows. But then the small monkey, Hanumanji, the form of the small monkey, sat there, and the bridge collapses. So again, Arjuna, by Krishna's grace, recognizes that he is Hanuman, and he gets his blessings, and there too Hanuman blesses, saying that he will be there as the emblem on his flag. So Arjuna is addressed as Kapitvajaha. We'll continue with this verse in our next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.